apologies from Bailey Avenue and to welcome Councillor Morgan and Bailey Kane as substitutes for Councillor Kavanagh and Mackenzie. Oh, and apologies for Robert Mooney as well. Okay. So, the webcast data protection notice. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. I have the discretion to terminate or suspend filming if, in my opinion, allowing the filming to continue would prejudice the proceedings of the meeting. Members are reminded that the cameras are activated by the sound system and they switch on the microphones when speaking and off again when finished speaking. Thank you. So we'll go to the first item on the agenda. Cathy?
First item on the agenda is the Age Friendly Progress Report 2019 and its report by Chief Executive.
So Cormac will speak to this report. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Just to give you some background and context in terms of this report coming before committee, back in 2015, we wanted to kind of gather, I suppose, some of the key activities that we were involved in, and we were aware of the WHO status around age-friendly. So we put together kind of an age-friendly strategy to address ourselves, become an age-friendly city. And we kind of addressed ourselves to kind of 8 key themes under the WHO, which are listed there: outdoor spaces and buildings, transportation, housing, social participation, respect and social inclusion, civic participation and employment, communication and information, and community sport and health service. This report, in a sense, kind of sums up some of the ongoing activity that's been undertaken over the last 4 years. I suppose on reflection, and members will see it in the paper, we probably think that one of the challenges we faced with the strategy was that in some ways it was sitting to the side of a lot of our other strategic priorities and a lot of our equality outcomes. And part of the process that we'd like to invite members to look at today is about us bringing that more in line with some of our other key reporting strands, so that we can capture and come back to a committee and scrutiny committees as well with information that's pertinent to age-friendly. Members will see at the appendix the list of outcomes and the activities underneath them. I'm not going to go through them in huge detail. I think one of the things to note as well, and I obviously welcome any questions that members have about those, but one of the things I just wanted to note was that we have engaged extensively with the Centre for Better Ageing, who are the kind of curators for the WHO status. And one of the things they said to us was that we were in advance of many of the other authorities who've undertaken this status, because we had actually progressed and identified key actions that we were trying to deliver. So we want to continue that work, but I think it probably is best if we use the existing equality outcomes and strategic plan priorities to focus our work around age-friendly going forward, while retaining our WHO status by badging some of those key deliverables under WHO status. So, as I say, I'm very happy to take any questions on that from members.
Thank you, Cormac. I think as there are 19 outcomes, we'll take the outcomes in order so that we're not jumping all over the place. So if anyone has any questions relating to outcome 1 to 5, I think we'll start off that way. Councillor Casey.
Kind of the question I have relates to kind of outcome 5 and 6, I suppose, in relation to travel for older people. It's probably more in relation to outcome 6 and how older people experience attractive, seamless and reliable travel. And I know there's a number of outputs there in relation to engaging with SPT about that, but one of my main concerns, and it relates specifically to kind of an issue that we're finding across the city just now, but is the bus operators themselves and how they approach their services, and how they potentially can cut services in areas which are predominantly kind of inhabited by elderly people. And I think that's a massive, massive challenge. A specific issue through my ward at the minute is the cutting of the 19A bus, and it's been extremely disappointing in terms of the dialogue that the bus operators have with people in communities. And I would like to see maybe if there's a way in which we can incorporate discussions and dialogue with the age-friendly city strategy to bus operators themselves as well as SPT, because I know SPT can kind of come in at the point in which a bus operator pulls out a service, but I think at that early dialogue with the operator, the operator themselves is key in how we do that. So I'd be keen to hear a wee bit more of how we can achieve that.
I think in terms of the detail, Councillor, in terms of the detail of the engagement with SPT, I'd probably have to go and get some more information about the actual mechanisms for that engagement. However, I suppose one of the things that I'm mindful of just in terms of how we structure it, and again, maybe I'm looking at it purely in terms of a reporting or performance reporting end, is that, for example, if we, as part of the council plan refresh, we were to maybe make a more robust statement around that engagement, that would be something we would pick up in terms of monitoring, and that would direct some of the action. But again, I can certainly come back and clarify some of the mechanisms in terms of the SPT board and the way that our membership functions there, which I'm not entirely clear of myself, but I can certainly come back and give you a more detailed answer.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine, and I can see the kind of the work that is ongoing with SPT regarding this. But again, it was just a kind of an ask, I suppose, of how we engage with the operators as well as SPT. And it might be through SPT that we engage with operators, but it would just be good to get a bit more information in relation to that.
Councillor Campbell.
Mine was a comment on outcome 4, actually, but it relates to the chat we just had there regarding the SPT element. I should first of all express an interest here because I'm a member of the SPT board. And obviously these matters have been raised there. I can't divulge what we've said there because I'm on that board, and obviously the chairperson of the board is over there, so I have to have his permission. But just to say that obviously this is a matter of ongoing concern which SPT officers are engaged with the bus companies at the moment. My query, though, is about the question of the ticketing. I think it was listed as one of our outcomes, and last week there was a statement given about making interconnected travel more possible between forms of transport. So I think one of those items have been achieved as a result of recent things. In terms of ongoing consultation with us, obviously our bus and transport connectivity commission thing that we had last year, that came up with a number of outcomes which obviously are relevant to the discussion around these outcomes, and I'd be just interested to see how that's been integrated into our work plan here. But obviously ongoing, we have mechanisms through SBT and through the community consultation they're doing with community planning partnership. We're having local meetings with the bus companies, with SPT, with bus transport users, and I've had 2 of those in my ward recently. We've had a 3rd public meeting as well with one of the bus operators, which Councillor Casey was involved in organising, and those have been very successful, engaging particularly the element of the population we're talking about in this paper.
I mean, just to say, I would completely agree with Councillor Campbell. I think one of the issues for us, and just being very frank as well in terms of, I suppose, the challenges we faced with the age-friendly strategy was, I think just, as I said, it sat to the, not to the side, but the activity was ongoing, but we didn't, the strategic lens to look through it and actually to pick up the activity wasn't really as focused. So we found that when we went back for updates, there wasn't really a structure for those updates in terms of we didn't have, there were a number of lead agencies, and I don't think it was focused maybe as clearly as it needed to be. The activity continued, but I think that our proposal here today is that we would bring it into things like the council plan refresh so that it is something that is reported and also then publicly and transparently visible. And also we take it into our performance reporting potentially as well at scrutiny committee. So I think our view is really just to make sure that that it doesn't get lost as a strategy to the side, which I think to some extent it maybe did a little bit until we kind of picked it up in the last year to see what was happening. That's not to say there wasn't activity, but I think we would want to have much more of a handle on the links between SBT with regard to that ticketing work, but also with regard to some of the other outcomes as well, to make sure that we were kind of fully on top of those, which I think we were kind of intermittently involved in curating them over the last number of years, and I think that's been fine, but I think we can do a bit better going forward.
If I may respond, Chair, just to to highlight some of the things that come up from that connectivity commission was that obviously the question of how bus companies and obviously SPT plans journeys is about how we understand that people use public transport and what they're using it for and where they're connecting from place to place, or it's connecting for hospital appointments, training or employment opportunities, or community hub access so that you can access other services. So bus services ought to be planned with that in mind about people's mobility, how they access and where they go from shopping to school to college, hospital, university, whatever they're doing. So I think that's not really fully part of bus companies' thinking when they're planning a route or planning to or thinking about withdrawing it and what its viability is, and also the knock-on effects around the opportunities. That if we want people to be active travelling citizens, to be more fit, get to stuff, we need to have properly connected transport to do that, and that's all part of the mix.
Billy Bartos.
Thank you, Chair. Given the number of comments which have been made specifically around SPT, I probably ought to contribute and obviously note that, like Councillor Campbell, I'm a member of the Strathclyde Partnership for Transport, and I also chair it. I have a second interest on behalf of this council, which is relevant, which is that I chair the Strathclyde Concessionary Joint Travel Scheme, and there's reference made to the fact that this scheme, which is funded by all the participant local authorities, effectively provides subsidy concessionary travel out with bus. So that is to say, concessionary travel as it has a bearing on subway and on rail within the Strathclyde area, as well as ferries, but that's less relevant in our area. The points I want to bring are really to make the observation that that concessionary travel scheme, which is funded by local authorities, is at the point of becoming financially unsustainable, and that is a matter which, in fact, the members of the committee are very concerned by, because we may cease to function within a fairly short space of time without a radical overhaul of the mechanism by which we're providing concessionary travel support. And that's a matter of critical interest for this topic. In terms of the role that SPT has in partnership working, clearly partnership is in the name, and we're happy to work with all the local authorities, and this is one topic in which there is clearly collaborative work, although unfortunately we're not able to decide where all the buses go, regrettably. And there are very much limits to what can be done. I am therefore thoughtful about the extent to which so much within the transport element outcome falls specifically and apparently exclusively onto SPT as an organisation. I wonder about that element of it. I don't recall this particular document coming to the full partnership board. I'm sure it will have been worked on in cooperation across offices, and I do wonder how we best manage the work on this, because I'm aware that this has come to a General Purposes Committee, yet age-friendly seems to me substantially around well-being and communities, and perhaps is therefore something which is suitable for a WECI territory, and progress around transport is perhaps relevant for a Transport Committee, and progress around progress and the measurement of progress is perhaps an operational performance issue. So I'm glad that it's here, but I do wonder whether or not the most effective work on this could happen elsewhere.
And I think, Councillor, I would actually echo that sentiment to some extent. I think that's probably one of the challenges we encountered when putting the document together, is that there are a number of different leads in different areas, and that's not to say that we would not, obviously we want to make sure that we're on top of it in terms of have some kind of central eye to it, but I think that one of the key challenges we faced was that it wasn't rooted through our existing, as I was mentioning, both scrutiny structures and also other relevant committees. And I think our idea with this is we also want to retain the WHO status. I think that's clear. We've attained it. We've actually exceeded some of the expectations around that. So we are keen that we badge some of the particulars that are relevant to that, maintaining that status correctly within maybe potentially scrutiny reports and other reports to committees. But yes, to focus it very much in terms of the actual activity rather than have it as a kind of a general mishmash that perhaps doesn't focus very clearly on the particular areas of interest.
Councillor Dornan.
Yeah, just following on from what Billy Bartos has mentioned, bus companies just decide what routes they'll take. Years ago they had to bid for these routes, and isolation and loneliness then kicks in because people are left without a bus route after certain times at night. And I think it's very important that we also look parallel to this, the loading bus model, because the private sector, understandably, are only interested in filling their shareholders' pockets, and that will not include isolation and loneliness. And if we're going to address it, then we need to do it in the public sector. Thank you.
Cormac, do you want to come back in on that?
I mean, I would echo Councillor Doran's sentiments. I've worked with the campaign for ending loneliness, and transport's always a huge issue, and construction of transport. I think some of the challenges around, we won't bore the committee because I'm sure members know better than myself, but the transport between areas rather than just directly into the centre as well seems to be a continuing challenge, not just for age-friendly, but I think for folk in general across the city. So yeah.
From outcomes 1 to 5, so we'll move on to outcomes 6 to 10. If anyone's got any relevant questions to those outcomes. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Before I wanted to ask something about outcome 7, but can I just note that afterwards I would like to ask something about the paragraph 10 that's in relation to all of the outcomes, if you see what I mean. But in terms of outcome 7, which is refers to age-friendly volunteering opportunities, I'm interested because there's a lot of information here about Glasgow Life, but whether volunteering is being looked at for its benefits, not, if you like, obviously there's sort of mental health, and one aspect of that is physical health. And I would certainly be disappointed if age-friendly meant an assumption that people couldn't undertake things which had some demand in terms of an element of physical activity. So I'm wondering if, for example, that issue of maintaining physical health is being looked at as part of volunteering opportunities, and linked to that, whether there is any learning being taken from what other local authorities or may have available for volunteering in their areas, to see if we are missing anything. And I think particularly of volunteering around various areas of sort of environmental activity where people may be outside, may be undertaking a degree or a lot of physical exercise, which clearly some people, or most people we hope, are able to. I mean, Glasgow has one of the lowest levels of healthy life expectancy, and one would hope that this is looked at in that context. Thank you.
Cormac.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm mindful of the fact, and I hoped one of my colleagues from Glasgow Life would be here to actually answer some of the specifics, just to get some of the detail on that. So I will endeavour to go away and get a response to the Councillor specifically on the dimensions of the volunteering strategy in terms of are they encouraging that physical activity. Unfortunately, I don't have that information with me just now, but I will get that to the thing.
I think if that information could be circulated to everyone, that would be great. Cormac. Councillor Morgan, we're back to you then for paragraph 10 on page 8. Next steps. Did you have a question there?
Thanks very much. I was to some extent, I understand the objective of integrating with the strategic plan and personally wouldn't have a criticism of that. My question was more about how that's to be achieved, and particularly because this document refers to outcomes. To my mind, some of the things that are being undertaken here relate more to what are set out as priorities in the strategic plan, and those priorities are tracked in relation to outputs, as the outcomes in this document are tracked in relation to outputs. But we know that the strategic plan itself also has outcomes, and those outcomes are not measured by outputs. They are measured with measures, if you like, of impact and of how have we made a difference. What I'm seeing as lacking here is the equivalent, if you like, of the performance framework that the Council has been developing, not the tracking of the strategic plan, but the actual performance framework that attempts to answer the question of how have we made a difference. Now, for each theme of the Council plan, there are perhaps three outcomes set in the strategic plan, and then a number of measures in the performance framework. So how are we going to translate these, whatever it was, 17, 19 outcomes into a means of tracking impact as opposed to outputs? Some of it may be about perception. A lot of your outcomes are about perception. But it seems to me that this doesn't, although you intend to translate it into the strategic plan, you haven't told us how it will be translated into the performance framework. Thanks.
I think, Councillor, that's a fair comment. I think, to be fair, that's probably the next stage of development for this. I don't think we were thoughtful at this point. I know the difference in terms of the qualitative difference between the two things. I think that maybe in some ways reflects some of the difficulty we've had with the age-friendly strategy, because we're using the framework that they had before. And I think we may come across areas which are probably difficult to translate. And I'm very happy, certainly, to come back to this committee and provide an update on that if that's appropriate, in terms of the areas that maybe are out with the capture, or we have difficulty bringing into the coherent performance framework that we've already kind of developed. But I think that's probably our next step, is to go through that. Looking at the council plan refresh, we don't pre-anticipate anything there, but looking at the council plan refresh as it develops and bring as much of that across coherently as we can. But as I said, I'm very happy to return to this committee, if appropriate, to update on any of the gaps within that.
Yes, happy with that. Yes, that would be good. Cormac. Any other questions? Okay, so the recommendations for this item were to, let me find them. To consider and note the progress to deliver the specific actions within the age-friendly strategy, and to note all the outcomes will continue to be delivered via the Council's strategic plan. Are we happy to note this report? Yes? Okay.
Item 2 is improving outcomes for disabled people in Glasgow, and its report by Chief Executive.
Cormac, are you talk?
Thank you, Chair. I suppose just to give a background to this paper in terms of disability in particularly, and disabled citizens of Glasgow. One of the things I think that we are very aware of, and were aware of at the last equality outcomes development, was I suppose a shortfall in terms of probably our focus, because of all the other competing priorities, on disability. We really want to make sure that we address that in time for our review of our equality outcomes next year. And one of the things we wanted to do was to work, I suppose, more jointly with disability organisations, and we, through networks like the Glasgow Disability Alliance, who obviously are a network group for many other disability organisations in the city. And we really want to to focus on a number of kind of key themes around disability, around kind of accessing services, accessible Glasgow, civic engagement, which again came up within the age-friendly strategy, and employment and skills. I think because of the very broad range of potential outcomes and work that we could develop for the strategic outcomes or the equality outcomes, we would, I think, be very keen to establish a short life working group to look specifically at disability. I know that Councillor Layden has agreed at this point, if agreed here today, to chair that group if that's appropriate. But again, I think we were just mindful of the fact that we probably have been a bit slower to engage with some of the third sector organisations and some of the community groups who are directly involved with disability, and we want to ensure that before we refresh the equality outcomes that we redress that.
Thank you, Cormac. Billy Bartos.
Chair, I'm very content in principle for there to be working groups which work on a great many important topics, and this does strike me as an important topic, but it does really strike me that the terms of reference of the Wellbeing, Empowerment, Community and Citizen Engagement City Policy Committee, which I've got in front of me, has within it very specifically some terms of reference which my instinct would be that this work should fit well alongside that other work. And I don't want to in any way I'm sure all of us around the table here will all be quite kind of passionate about ensuring that the issues in this paper and many others issues in the last paper are well addressed. But this is a committee which typically catches things which are not within other committees' policy reference. And in order for us to have coherent work which makes the connections between related activity, I would have thought that the best place for this would be the Wellbeing and Empowerment Committee.
Cormac.
Councillor, I totally understand, I suppose, the extent to which the Wellbeing Committee does deal with a lot of issues around disability, particularly as regards to social care. I suppose that the reason, and I totally appreciate the relevance of that to that committee, and it may be that committee also should be cited on this. However, I think that the purpose of bringing it here is because of the broad range of disabilities. I mean, I know myself working on the BSL Act, one of the key changes in how we perceive people who have sensory impairment is about their cultural access to the city, and it's now language. So in a sense, we're shifting. I mean, I totally accept your point, but I think there's a slightly broader remit in terms of mental health and other areas which cut across into broader business. And my feeling is that it is appropriate, in my view, for this committee to see that. Whether other committees are cited, I think, is important. But my feeling is that the breadth of this is beyond perhaps the traditional social care interest.
Could just maybe come in there at the development session that we had a few months ago, 6 months ago. Councillor Mooney actually raised this subject, and he would have liked to add it to the work plan, especially looking at the employment of disabled people and how we can improve working environments for anyone with a disability. And that was one of the reasons why it was added to the work plan, was to help Councillor Mooney, because he was aware of the stats that we were looking at. It didn't show any improvement in the amount of employees that the council had, and it was to address different areas in the employment area. Councillor Campbell, Billy Bartos, did you want to come in? Sorry.
I did have a response to that general observation, but I didn't want to. Well, it's really just citing explicitly in the WECI terms of reference. And again, I wouldn't want to stop the work which Councillor Mooney was seeking to have done, far from it. But the specific terms of reference of the Wellbeing Empowerment Committee include to fill the functions of policy development, including consideration of equalities issues as they relate to council policies and services for wellbeing, empowerment, community and citizen engagement. And the list is very substantial and long, including community empowerment, including financial inclusion. And that also is the committee that has the best connection with integrated joint board activity. Whereas our terms of reference are very narrowly to fulfill what's within our specific terms of reference, and follow it in the manner of city policy committees, and also to mop up anything not in others. And again, my concern is that the people who are closest to and most actively engaged with a whole variety of connected, really important issues would not have immediate sight. And in the end, we all have sight of stuff which isn't immediately within our realm because it comes as minutes to the full council and so forth. So I'm just noting on record my concern that there's a risk that if we undertake the work, should the work be reporting to us or should the work be reporting to WECI? What is our degree of involvement versus the degree of involvement of neighbourhoods and sustainability? Neighbourhoods and the regeneration equivalent for the economic aspects of what Councillor Mooney had sought.
Billy Bartos, when you look at section 4.3 on page 40, there's suggested themes for the working group, assessing services, accessible Glasgow, civic engagement and participation, employment and skills. So I think I agree that the topic is in the terms of reference of another committee, some of those themes, two definitely, with employment and skills possibly being the one that would come back to general purposes. But I think in the first instance, if we can get the short life working group set up and take it from there, see where the themes are going, and this will be a work in progress, but there will be definite communication between the different policy committees.
I actually want
Councillor Campbell, and then we'll come to Councillor Mac.
I wanted to respond actually to the point that Bailey Bartos is making actually, which is quite relevant in the sense that there is overlapping jurisdiction here. And although one of those items is clearly most sits with us, I agree with that the others do most sit with WECI. Is it not within a possibility to have a joint short life working group with that committee, which would then satisfy partly Councillor Bartos' concerns? The point I actually wanted to make as well, which was about underemployment and skills, was one of the tasks for such a short life working group ought to be reviewing what the current statistics are of the workforce. We currently do that in a long-term short life working group for BME employment, and that's been quite successful at pushing, targeting and looking at measures that we should take to improve the applications and improve the process of shortlisting and finally employment and career progression for people from BME backgrounds. So I'd hope, and I think that was Councillor Mooney's intention when he raised this issue, that we do something similar for disability and for disabled applicants and staff members.
I think that there's nothing to stop a short life working group from determining which committee their specific theme would report back to. Councillor McElroy.
Thank you, Chair, and also thank you to Councillor Campbell for cutting my grass, because I was, as a member of this committee, and it was your predecessor, Councillor Ferns, and Councillor Kelly from, I can't remember what committee it was, you've got to forgive me, but we had a joint working group around the procurement strategy, and because it kind of cut across the two themes, and it worked pretty well. and actually it's a pain in the backside for some of the officers who have to report to 2 committees, but actually it keeps as many people informed as possible and gets as much input as possible. So I think a kind of a halfway house would work really well if we're minded to propose that.
Will we propose a joint, or Billy Bartos, sorry?
So I think I understand Councillor Campbell's point in terms of which of the points actually falls within our remit, because I wasn't at all clear. And actually it's a sliver of employment and skills as it bears to the Council's own employment strategy. I had read employment and skills, however, to be, and from the kind of comment earlier about Councillor Mooney's original intent, I had read that to be about policy which has an effect on employment and skills approaches across the city as a whole, and that would seem to me to be an economic development related activity, and so not within the remit of this committee. But I do see that there is the sliver which relates to employment and skills policy by us corporately that does have a connection with this committee. But beyond that, actually, I think that there's a whole bunch of stuff which, you know, there's a third committee. I'm content for there to be a short life working group. I really want to emphasise that. I don't think it's within our power to say that it will go to another, it will report to another committee. Presumably that's for the other committee to consider. But you know, let's progress with it somehow.
Cormac.
Just a very brief response, Chair. I mean, I think Councillor Bartos's, Bailey Bartos's point is well made. I think, though, that just to come back to the purpose of bringing the paper to this committee will also see the equality outcomes, which are the outcomes for the Council. And this work is also work that underpins the equality outcomes. So I completely appreciate that there are significant aspects of this which are relevant and pertinent to our colleagues in the Wellbeing Committee. But I think as an overview, which is what this committee does provide for both things like the ASPR reports and for outcomes, the quality outcomes development, I think it is appropriate that this committee does see it. And you know, again, I don't have the terms of reference handy, so I don't know what the exactly. But I would suspect that we could certainly engage with the Wellbeing Committee if there was any issue in terms of them seeing it. But I think it's appropriate for this committee to see this.
Okay, any other questions? Are we happy at this stage for to consider and to approve the establishment of a short life working group, and for you to be assured that I will speak to the chair of WECI and we can discuss the membership of the group. But if anyone has any interest in joining the group, to email either Cormac or myself, and we can get more information out. Is that okay? Agreed. Okay, agreed.
Move on to item 3 is the development of the employee supports to tackle harmful gambling, and it's a report by Director of Governance and Solicitor to the Council.
Robert.
Thank you very much, Chair. The report before you is, I think, complementary to a report which went to Wiki. And at number 1 background, you can see there was a recommendation which went to the Wiki Committee. Wiki has been concerned about the wider aspects of harmful gambling, has been looking very much at the problems that the city has and the citizens have. This report is looking much more inward at the council's employees, and the sort of logic behind it is that if as a council we have an interest in trying to address the problems of harmful gambling, we should perhaps put our own house in order too. And this report is trying to explore some of those issues and doesn't come up with a solution itself, but suggests a way forward. I guess there's a couple of points I would make about it. First of all, it looks at what currently is out there, and then secondly, it starts to edge a way forward on what might be a solution in terms of support to employees. In terms of what's out there, it mentions two things. It mentions the conditions of service background, and it mentions the work that my friend Karen has been doing through the Healthy Working Lives programme. In terms of conditions of service, I think it's a regional document. It looks very regional to me. I think it's flawed for two main reasons. One, the language is very, very dated. It reads like sort of regional personnel policies. Secondly, it sees the problem of harmful gambling very much through the prism of the Council's disciplinary procedures. So I think whatever you want to do, you would want to fundamentally review that conditions of service background. It contrasts very much with the work that Karen's been doing in terms of healthy working lives, where what we've been trying to do is go for a much more employee-centred approach. Now, healthy working lives is wider than just gambling, but through members in the committee will know that some of the roadshows we've been doing across the council have been picking up in certain aspects of harmful gambling. It's been a lot of signposting, but we've also involved Gamblers Anonymous to provide support. In terms of a potential way forward, there's a few sort of interesting things. Unite, the trade union, have an employer's charter. And what they've been trying to do with this is create a best practice model for how an employer should provide support to employees who might be affected by gambling. So I think that would be an interesting thing to look at that. And that segues nicely into the fact that I think no matter what you did, I think you'd have to have the trade unions involved and at the table. I'm very conscious of the fact that the support that's provided externally to citizens comes largely from the third sector. So I think that's perhaps another wee sort of straw there that says you would need to get third sector involvement and you would want to capitalise on that experience and that expertise. And I think where this is kind of leading towards, and I'm sorry to say the term again because Cormac mentioned it before, another cross-party working group. And in defence of me asking for a cross-party working group, what I would say is, in terms of HR, it has proved highly successful in the past. Councillor Campbell mentioned the work that went ahead to create the BME action plan. Of course, there was a cross-party working group in terms of equal pay. It has proved highly successful. So the recommendation would largely be that we do set up a cross-party working group, which would be chaired by the workforce convener, would involve trade union representation, and I advised committee that at last week's workforce board I raised the issue with the trade unions and they would be highly supportive of that. I think it would also have to have third sector participation on the group so we could get that expertise. Can I just finish off very quickly with one wee technical point? The version of this report, which is on the web, is slightly different from the version before you because we didn't have a chance to change it until we managed to change it for the web. And that's really simply to put in the recommendation, the third-party representation. It wasn't in the original report. So, third parties, I'm very sorry. Third sector. So the recommendation includes the term and the third sector. I'm very happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. Do we have any questions? Billy Bartos?
I note I've heard very carefully Mr Anderson mentioned the value of the cross-party working groups in previous incarnations, and I think it's certainly to be commended that that pieces of work are undertaken with collaboration and with citing across parties. I am not sure. I wonder whether or not we ought not to be encouraging a model of working where this seems to me to be work which would be very well managed by the Workforce Board in principle, which has cross-party representation and also has the unions. It strikes me that certainly as a piece of corporate policy it would have to come here before final approval by CAC or full council. I wonder whether or not we shouldn't be making sure that there is awareness and connection across political parties without necessarily creating an expectation that that every party must be represented, otherwise it's obviously not caring about problem gambling or you know. So I don't know whether or not the model of this particular working group, which I think would benefit most from third sector and from professional input on a variety of connections rather than necessary necessarily a vast amount of the political time, whether or not there's any way to finesse the delivery of this. And I would certainly ask that this be discussed with the Workforce Board as to how this piece of workforce work could be facilitated cross-party rather than with a traditional working group model.
Robert?
Thank you, Chair. Bailey Bartos, I think HR we became quite fascinated by the whole cross-party working group thing because we've found it incredibly useful. But I appreciate that that might not be a kind of universal view. I think the suggestion you make about the Workforce Board is really interesting because that would tend to be the members who might be most interested in the subject matter. And I think it would be the people we tend to go to in any case. So it would be like Councillor Young from the Greens, Councillor McElroy from Labour, Councillor Balfour would be SNP. So if the chair's happy, and if the committee's happy with the concept of a cross-party working group, we could report into Workforce Board in the first instance and use the members on that Workforce Board as the members of the political parties.
Bailey Scanlon, we'll come back to you on that, Robert. Bailey Scanlon, and then do you want to come in, Alan?
Thanks, Chair. Could I just ask Robert, obviously a few months back there was new legislation passed regarding the fixed odd betting terminals in bookmakers' shops. I thought that legislation had been put through and that had all stopped. But, I mean, recently I'm a person who frequents these shops. I like to put on a wee football coupon now and again. But the chap ended up coming up and told me he won £500 on the spinning a wheel. I thought it had all stopped and there were no kind of jackpots like that. I take it that's not the case?
Can I come in?
Colin?
Bailey Scanlon, there was a change in the law about fixed odd betting terminals. Karen's done a bit of work on how our staff gamble. So she's been out and discussed with people. So it might be, if the committee were interested, it might be helpful for Karen to give us a bit of a background on what sort of gambling behaviour our staff exhibit and what they talk about and what their concerns are. The committee would find that useful.
Yes, through the Health Roadshow model, we're out talking to people about their general health, and some of the feedback we've had is that people really do want us to support them with their gambling habits and addictions. And they have attended kind of lived experience workshops and get to hear other people talk about their own experiences. And what I have seen is people approach them and open up and talk about how it affects them and how it seems to be part of their everyday life and their working life. I've heard of the fixed odd machines in the betting shops, stopping at break times, stopping at lunchtime, but more so on their, they're on their own phones and devices. And some people talking about this being a 24-hour-a-day kind of addiction that they can't let go of. And then they're coming into work tired and spending their money and borrowing money off colleagues, and this kind of vicious circle that it creates. So that's my experience of talking to our own employees and how, what's out there and what's available affects them. Okay.
So I think Bailey Scanlon's point is well made, which is there's been a societal change about how fixed odd betting terminals are regulated, and that, I think that's some of the stuff that WECI's looking at. But when it comes to our staff, we've got an issue with people doing it at their work, on their way to and home from work, doing it outside of the times when the betting shops are open, and that's the kind of behaviour that people are asking us for help to deal with.
Councillor Dornan?
No, I think it was Councillor Casey was first.
I was happy enough you going first, but it's fine. Just in terms of the kind of membership of the cross-party working group, I wouldn't want to be prescriptive in saying it should just be the members of the Workforce Board who are on that working group. I really think this is a piece of work that we've been looking at as a committee for the best part of 2 years now, on and off, and I really think it should be opened up to allow members of this committee to be part of that working group, who maybe report to the Workforce Board, but I don't want to be prescriptive and it only being them that are on that working group.
Just in relation to some of the points on the fixed terminals, it used to be the case that the licensing board decided what went in a pub, what went in a bookies, how many bookies there would be, but now, just like the buses, who determine their own routes, the people in the licensing trade determine what they will do and what they will implement. So one of the things that should be discussed is the reintroduction of that to the licensing boards for them, because I used to go to the licensing board, we used to go to Manchester and look at different gaming machines they want to introduce to Glasgow, and we would say yeah or nay. That doesn't happen anymore, so we need the power back to councils. Also legislation, just for part of it, would be that the same as smoking was banned from television advertising. Gambling should be as well, and it's something we should seriously look at, not just in Scotland, but throughout the whole of Britain, but initially, obviously, here, because that's our remit. So if we're going to tackle this, we need to hit these people, you know, because they're doing everything. They're making cartoon characters out of games, so as where Waynes get to see it. Everything's kind of cartoony. So, and you can bet in the middle of a tennis match or a football match who's going to just... So they've got it to the nth degree, and we allow it to happen. So we need control back by the authorities, not the people out there that want to make money. Again, I'm talking about corporate malls making money again. But if we're going to be serious, we need headings like that and to tackle it through legislation.
I think even when it comes down to items that this committee is responsible for, one of them is the marketing, advertising, so that we could stop adverts on bus stops. I don't know.
We're specifically today looking at how we support our staff. WECI are looking more generally at gambling. We've started it separately, a bit of work on what's the council family's interaction with gambling, and we're going to have to take a view on that. So the Scottish Open Snooker Championship, for example, happens in a council premises, and its headline sponsor is a gambling firm. So that is something that the council's going to have to engage with at some point. But in terms of the committee today and the paper that's in front of us today, it's about supporting our workforce to deal with their own addictions rather than the wider issue which WECI are looking at.
And we're the policy workshop, the policy committee who is taking forward the new HR policy. So I think also when we look at the recommendations, if we're looking at should this be a workforce board or should it be a short life working group reporting to this committee, I would rather it was a short life working group reporting to this committee, because members who are on the workforce board can join the short life working group, but also it opens it up more to someone who maybe has an interest in this area, and it also, more importantly, opens it up to the third sector organisations such as Gamble Aware, who can join the short life working group, which maybe not have that access to the workforce board. So I think initially what we'll do is we'll start off with the again, it's another email to Robert, is it? Yeah. Registering any interest in the short life working group initially.
Bailey Ballantyne, I think what we've done in the past is we've written to all the leaders and asked them for nominations. And we'll contact myself, Karen and Debbie will have a chat later, and we'll talk to the third sector.
Okay, have we agreed then to set up the cross-party working group?